Hello, this is The Jay Show, and this is Dr. Jay Smith here in London, and we have back with us Hatun Tash, the expert on the Qur'an, the expert really on Islam, and one of the ones we bring in to look at the historical critique especially.
Hello, Jay. Thanks for having me again.
It's great to have you back. We had a great time with the 26 Arabic Qur'ans. We looked at the differences. We had, 14 episodes on that, didn't we?
Yes, that was in a couple of months back.
It is good.
Yeah.
But that's now being aired. People are watching it. They're looking at it. They're starting to come to conclusions on it. And what's more important, they're starting for the first time to focus back on questions on the Quran that they've never talked about before.
Yeah. So we looked at the claim, is the Arabic Quran all the same? We looked at the Qurans exist in 2016, 2017, and then we showed some evidence that Arabic Qurans were different. Now we are moving to the new history of the Quran.
We're still talking about the history, though, aren't we?
Yeah.
This is the material that people haven't used. This is the people we have talked, and there have been many courses. You can find lots of books written on the internal problems of the Quran.
Yeah.
Looking at the historical anachronisms, looking at the scientific errors, looking at the contradictions, looking at the moral problems within the Quran, looking at how the Quran treats women or men or children. And there have been many studies. What people haven't done is looking at the external critique, which would be the historical critique.
Yeah, so that's the time we step in, because now Muslim scholars start looking at the historical side of the Quran, Quranic manuscripts. We step in and then unpack those informations.
So let's start with a possible scenario. Let's take a look and see what we do know about the emergence of Islam. And when we look at the emergence of Islam, we knew that there needed to be an Arab identity. And we know this Arab identity really came to a crux around the late 7th century when Abdul Malik was in power.
Yeah, 691.
Around 691, 690, he created that and put that large building right there in the middle of Jerusalem.
You mean Dome of the Rock?
The Dome of the Rock. And it was the largest of its state. And it's still today, if you go to Jerusalem, it really dominates the skyline there. Huge building up above the Church of the Sepulchre, which is across the valley. So it's higher up. And it says basically, we are the new people. We are the new man on the block, you might say. We are the new the new, not only imperial power, but also religious power, because that's the sanctuary of Byzantine Christianity. Yeah. That's where their God died and rose again, and that's where Islam is saying, no, this is now the new prophet.
Yeah, and then when you look at the scripts in the Dome of the Rock, you see it is very polemical statement against Christian
Surah
faith.
4, Ayah 171,
yeah.
Surah 112, referring very clearly that say not three, God is one.
Yeah.
And he has no son.
Of Jesus. So it's very polemical statements for its position.
And there's nothing there about Muhammad going up to the 7 heavens. Isn't that interesting?
Miracle of Islam.
Which is what that building is supposedly built for. That's what we've been told that building is there. Every Muslim knows that's the 3rd most holy shrine. That's the reason it was built, because that's where Muhammad went up to the 7 heavens, met Allah, came down to and met Moses, and bounced back and forth between the 2 heavens, about 50 prayers, 45 down to 5 prayers.
Yeah.
The Miraj, as we're called. That's not anywhere on those inscriptions. So obviously, this is an attack against Jesus. This is an attack against his divinity and the Trinity and his sonship. All of those inscriptions talk about those 3. But what else do? They introduce this name,
Muhammad.
Yes. So he is introduced as the alternative to this other Jesus.
By Arab sources, yes.
By Arab sources. The name Islam is introduced. The name Muslim is introduced at that time. Once you have a prophet now that now is an Arab prophet, for the Arab people, you need an Arab book. And then, of course, you also need, beyond that, you need to have a context where your man is now taking over and is now becoming the head of, well, you might say the head of this religion, but it's going to be something that's going to be, you can see, they need to have a history. And that's why we talked about the fact that once you put the man in place, you introduce him in the Dome of the Rock, then you've got to give him a history. The histories don't appear until, another 100 years later, over 100 years. In fact, Ibn Hisham is the first to write down his biography, getting it from Ibn Ishaq. We don't know how much of Ibn Ishaq he threw out or kept. We do know that he died in 833. So the early 9th century, you finally get his biography.
Yeah, that's approximately 200 years after the death of Muhammad.
Okay, but 100 years after the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
So once you introduce the man, about another 100, 120 years, then you introduce his history, then you still got to have his sayings. Those are not introduced for another 40 years after that. In the 870s by Al-Bukhari and then
Imam Bukhari, yeah.
Muslim comes after. So you have the man, you finally have his story, and then you have his sayings. That takes, so as you said, if you're looking at, if the man died in 632, you're looking at 200 to 240 years later that you finally have the man, the book, the place. The place would be, of course, there's the other problem. What about the place?
I'm not sure when you say man and the book, we can say the book. Because when we look at the Islamic history, we see there is a problem with the book. Yes, we've got the man introduced around late 7th centuries. We've got the sayings of this man is introduced around 9th century. Yet there is a question on the book. When does this book introduced? Because when we look at the Quran as in historical context, we see there are some mess and some missing pieces.
Okay, so we assume that they have the book, the man, the place, and the story. And you're saying, hold on a minute, they don't have the book yet. Hold on, and that's true. Let's go back to the book. And this is what we want to do now. These series of talks that we're going to do now look at the book. So we want to look at the Quran itself. And we want to not just look at what it looks like or what it says. That's not our job. We want to see how it was put together.
Yep.
We want to see where it came from. We want to see what do the researchers, what do the historians,
yep.
the paleographers, looking at paleography, we'll even look at some of the carbon dating, things like this. We're going to start looking at a whole different set of criticisms that have been applied to the Bible. These are the same criticisms that were asked by Wellhausen back in the, I'm going to turn it up to right side up, back in the 1800s. Looking at this book, saying, hold on a minute, when you look at this book, do we have any of the original manuscripts? Can we know whether the original manuscripts were the same then as they are today? Do we know who the authors are? These are the kind of questions we want to ask now, isn't it?
So those questions have been asked to Bible for centuries now. Finally, in 21st century, we are going to ask the similar question about the Muslim holy book, about the Quran.
Okay, to do that, let's start and see what the claims that are made by the Muslims.
Yep.
And let's go and let's put on screen now what we have here. If you can put them on screen, just take a look. I want you to read this. This is for the Mishkat al-Masabi, which is the compilation of the 6 most authoritative hadith.
Yep.
What do they say?
So, claim is the Quran is the greatest wonder among the wonders of the world. This book is second to none in the world according to unanimous decision of the learned man in points of diction, style, rhetoric, thoughts, and sounds of law and regulation to shape the destinies of mankind.
Now that's a huge
Quran
part.
is the greatest wonder and second to the none in this world.
Now you can see I mean, basically what they're saying, it is inimitable. There's nothing equal to this book.
I am amazed that this claim comes from Muslims, but are they able to support this claim or not? We will see that.
Here's another claim, and this is comes from the Quran itself. What does the Quran say itself?
Quran itself says, will they say Muhammad had forgotten it? Answer.
Forged it.
Answer, bring therefore a chapter like unto it, and call whom you to your assistance beside Allah if you speak truth. So, Surah 10, Surah 2, and Surah 17 says, if you claim Quran has been there are the parts in the Quran has been taken or forged from other books, bring something like that.
Compare it.
Compare it.
Find anything that's like it, that it's equal. What it's saying, it is superior to everything
else. Yeah.
You know, I did this at Trafalgar Square back in the 1990s here in London. Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad was there up on top of the plinth, the Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, and they were having a big rally for Islam. It was on in August, summer August day. About 5,000 Muslims were there in Trafalgar Square, and he called me up onto the plinth with him, and we had an impromptu debate right there. Just did it right off the top of his head on the Quran. back and forth with a microphone. After about 45 minutes of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, he then quoted this verse.
Bring
therefore a chapter like Mr. Smith, if you don't really like the Quran, bring something better. Show me anything. So I went up to the microphone and I took out my Bible and I opened up to Psalm 23 and I started reading Psalm 23 into the microphone. They turned off the microphone about halfway through it. So I just stepped forward to the edge of the plit, and then I just read with my speaker's corner voice, as you know, is pretty loud. After I had finished, I closed the Bible, turned towards the sheikh, and I say, bring anything like this. Show me anything that equals Psalm 23. So you can do this. In fact, anybody watching, you can do this yourself. If that question is brought to you, if Muslims read that to you, just open up your Bible, go to your favorite chapter, go to your favorite verse. I like Psalm 23. You can go to 1 Corinthians 13, Psalm 1, any of the Psalms, and then ask them the same question. Put it right back in their lap and say, show me anything in the Quran that can equal any of our Psalms, or whatever is your favorite verse. But don't stop there. Don't stop there. Then go and say why it's better. Look at what this God is. This is a shepherd. My God's my shepherd. Is your God a shepherd? Does he come and walk with you? Does he come and give you your food every day? Is he able to do that? By doing that, you've taken a claim that's in the Quran that they love to claim all the time, thinking that you're not going to have an answer because people think, well, let's see, linguistically, maybe there's grammatically, maybe, they start thinking through. They're overthinking it. Don't overthink it. Be very clear. Our Bible is superior. Hands down, it's superior to the Quran.
But other thing is helpful to remember, we do not make the same claim. We don't say Bible is the word of God, and we don't, Bible is word of God for you to prove that you need to produce something like the Bible. We don't make such a claim. It's the Muslim makes those claims, yet there is already lots of question to ask regarding this ayah, because who is the one who is going to judge?
That's right. That's right.
Is it Allah who is going to judge? If it is Allah judging regarding the Psalm 23 to Quran, how you are going to hear from Allah, which is the much better? That's another topic.
So these are huge claims. What we're going to do then, we're going to take, in fact, we're going to take these claims apart.
Plus, another claim Quran makes about itself is Quran is the mother of the book. That's from Surah 43. So it's not only if you need to bring something like this, it is also Quran is the mother of the book. So they are very, very deep claims about Quran itself. Comes from the Quran.
Confront this claim, Hatun. Now what we're going to do now, let's confront it. And I want to go through 7 areas, 7 historical, external areas of confrontation. Let's look at them up on the screen. We'll go through them one after another. So these are going to be the 7 areas we're going to investigate. The first one is compilation difficulties, how it was compiled. Secondly, we're going to go into historical anachronisms. These are problems historically that just do not fit from what we know of history in the Quran. And then we're going to look at what we call source criticism. Source criticism means where did these stories come from? Where are the sources? Because the Quran has many stories that don't belong. Then we're going to spend an awful lot of time, and most of our time we'll be spending on manuscript criticism. And that's why is manuscript criticism so important?
As we talked a little bit earlier, people challenge the authenticity of the Bible, and they look at the earliest manuscripts and then they ask us questions. So for centuries, we haven't done this questioning of the manuscripts for the Quran.
There you go.
So now we are going to ask
This is one of their favorite polemics, isn't it?
So now we are going to ask the same questions they ask.
Like with like, like with like.
How the Quran has been compiled historically? Do we have evidence which takes us back to Quran time of the Muhammad? What Muslim scholars says about Quranic manuscripts? Okay,
so we'll spend more time on that. Let's go back then to our slide again. Then after the manuscript evidence, we're then going to look at ancient corrections. And we're going to show you that there have been corrections, that this is not a book that's uncorrupted or unchanged, as they always claim. And then we're going to look at modern corrections, and these are things that you did. We already did this together earlier. This is the 26 Qurans, looking at modern differences, what they call ahruf and kirat. And then we're going to end with the Birmingham folios. And the reason we're going to do that is because that's modern. That's a very modern claim.
A couple of years ago, couple of folios found in Birmingham in England.
So we're going to look at that and debunk that very clearly. And then we're going to come to conclusions on it. So let's get right into it. Let's go to the first problem. And the first problem, if you look on the slide there, you can see the first problem is the compilation. How was this book, the Quran, put together. Now, that right there, even that question right there bothers Muslims. Because what does that suggest?
So we just look at the tradition account of the Quran, and then we see Muhammad didn't compile the Quran as a book. Right. Around Muhammad died 632, he didn't leave book behind himself. First Quran compiled according to tradition between 632 to 634. And then there were some problems with that Quran. Caliph Uthman steps in around 650s. He compiles the first perfect Quran, second perfect Quran around 650s. That's called Uthmanic Quran. But as we look at the tradition, we see actually there are lots of problems regarding the Quran until 650s. Some part of the Quran people forget. They didn't even remember if it was the part of the Quran or not. Some part of the Quran was eaten by animals, by sheep or goat. Part of the chapters are not in the Quran because people forget or Allah abrogated that. Order of the surahs are different. Help me out. And
well, we're going to actually get into all this, but we're going to unpack it. But let me just say, even before we get into all what we do now know, the whole question itself is a problem for a Muslim, because the idea that the compilation is in question subverts the view that God protects his revelation. From the very beginning, it is eternal. From the very beginning, God is the one that superintends it by sending it through the angel Gabriel down to this man named Muhammad. So there's the superintending. The superintending would be controlled by God over his revelation. And so this idea that somehow between Muhammad receiving it and it being written down, that's the question we're looking at. The time that Muhammad received it and it gets written down, God should be superintending it. He should be protecting it.
In that case, there is a question about God's power.
If we're talking about compilation,
attributes.
that's audacious for us to even bring that up. Can you see why Muslims are bothered by this, even this question of compilation? What do you mean compilation? That's only something the Bible has. And they don't even think that this may be a problem with the Quran. They think this is only a problem with the Bible because this is already assumed to be a man-made book. This is not a man-made book. So the whole premise they're starting with is this has nothing to do with human intervention. There is no human capacity when we're talking about the Quran. It is almost like a magical book.
Yeah, we know from what Muslim scholars wrote about it, that's not true claim.
Well,
that's not true. But it's good that our dear Muslim friends are making those claims. So now we can openly talk about those claims.
Well, this is what I always look at, and this is what you can do. See, this is writing, the Arabic. This is writing on a page that's been put into a book, a codex.
Yeah.
How did that writing get onto that page? Not the modern day, not today in the 21st century, but how did the original writings get put onto a page, put into a book, compiled as one volume? That's what we're talking about when we're saying compilation. Compilation is nothing more than somewhere at some time someone had to write it down.
Yeah.
Okay, regardless of whether it was sent by God through angel to a man, that man didn't read or write, as we well know. It had to be written down at some time. And the questions we're going to ask is, well, if it was such a great book, and this is the greatest book in the history of mankind, right? It's the final book. It's the final revelation given to the final prophet, the seal of all prophets.
Yeah.
Why did God choose someone who couldn't read or write?
Well, I'm not sure if you would be in the place of questioning God's wisdom. But
well, I am. To me, that's why would God choose someone who couldn't read or write?
That's called wonders of Islam. Yet he had people who were able to write it down.
Who was Zayd ibn Thabit?
He was the secretary of Muhammad.
What do secretaries do?
They type. They write for you.
They don't type, but they write.
They write for you.
So that's his job.
Yeah. So Muhammad was capable to order people to compile the Quran as the revelation comes. And when he dies, they would say, okay, revelation finished from now.
There was no Quran written down when Muhammad was alive.
Yeah, okay. That is pretty sad, actually, when you look at the claims Muslim makes.
Pretty inept on my if his only job, his only responsibility is to receive this revelation and then send it to the world, and he didn't even begin to write it down.
Yeah, if you think about it like this, Muhammad is the one who gives birth to the Quran, yet he doesn't even take care of that baby.
So we do have a real problem at the very beginning. So now we do know that it was put together after Muhammad died.
Yes. So first copy was put together under the Abu Bakr.
Abu Bakr, 632, 634, okay.
Yeah, that's the first caliph. And then that copy was given to Hafsa.
One of the wives of Muhammad.
And then around 650s, because of the...
Third caliph, 650s, so talk about Uthman.
Yeah, because there were disagreement regarding the Quran, they made one perfect Quran.
They made one perfect Quran.
That is the second edition of the Quran.
But what we want to do, let's go ahead and let's look at the story and let's put it up on the slide. Look at the slide there. This is Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 6. Yeah. Now we're coming into Sahih Bukhari. This is what every Muslim knows. This is what we're going to see in these two next slides. This one here now is with Uthman. We're now in 652. Uthman is asking Zayd ibn Thabit to bring that Quran.
Yeah.
Why that Quran?
Because now Muslims start accusing one another they are not Muslim the way they recite the Quran. So there is a disagreement within Ummah, within Muslim circle. And Uthman is going to order the Quran to be compiled in perfect form once for all. So that takes place as a second edition of the Quran around 650s.
All right.
As Uthman does that, one of the things he does is order Quran to be written in one dialect,
right,
and also order all other written form of the Quran to be burned.
Okay.
So from 650s, we've got one perfect Quran compiled under the Uthman.
All right, so there is the problem right there. What 650 is compiled under Uthman, and then what does he do next? And then we go to the next slide, because what's interesting, what he does next in the next slide is he then takes it and sends it to every province.
Yeah.
How many provinces?
So there are lots of in-house debates. That means no one knows. Some people make a claim it's only 4 cities. Some people say 6 cities. Some people say 7 cities. But when we look at the Islamic history, we see actually there should be 9 provinces.
Okay, we'll just look at on the slide there. There are 9 provinces, and there they are listed right there.
Yeah.
So we can see this includes Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. Those are the 9 provinces right there, which means there should be 9 Qurans then.
That should be 9 perfect Quran from Surah Fatiha to Surah Nas, Surah 1 to Surah 114. We should have 9 perfect Quran.
And this is only 1,400 years ago. It's not very long ago, because we can go back to the British Library and you can get the entire New Testament 300 years earlier than that, from the 4th century, complete, all 27 books. Right next to it is the Alexandrinus, the entire Old and New Testament from the 5th century. That's 200 years earlier. You want to go down to the Vatican in Rome, there's another codex called Codex Vaticanus, again, 300 years earlier than the 7th century. If we can come up with 3 complete manuscripts of the New Testament, 27 books, 300 to 200 years earlier, why can't they come up with one of the 9? Remember, they control these cities, they control this whole area, they control from Spain all the way to India. Certainly they could maintain and preserve those 9 manuscripts or codices.
One of the things might helpful for us to remember, even though we've got our complete New Testament approximately 300 years after, from the 4th century, yet that is soon after the persecution was over, because Christians have been persecuted through history. Yet when we look at the Islamic history,
no persecution.
We see it was Muslims who did the persecution to the other people.
Right.
So they shouldn't have any excuse to not provide us 9 perfect Qurans which Uthman compiled. Yet let's look at if they can provide for us only 1 copy.
Okay, let's do that. But before we do it, let's go back to Sahih Bukhari. Let's put it back up on the screen again. Sahih Bukhari, it's now 6 verse 510. After he sends it out to the 9 provinces, what does he do next?
He ordered every written form of the Quran to be burned.
Wait. Burned? No, you don't burn manuscripts. Listen, you burn manuscripts today, you get killed.
Yes,
so are you saying that...
If I do that today, I can get killed. It's not only that, if I put the Quran on the floor today, I can get death threats. Or even I underline the Quran. But in 650s, Muslims didn't see there was any problem for one caliph who never communicated with Allah, who never had any revelation from angel, thought it was all right to burn every written form of the Quran.
So anything that remained that did not agree with that Quran,
or did agree with this one, whatever was written down, they ordered to be burned by the third caliph
Which
of Islam.
includes all the 7 ahruf.
Yes.
Which means all the derivations, the different readings.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's the compilation problems. We now know that there's some huge problems with compilation. Let's now then go to the second problem. And we have that up on the screen there. This is the historical anachronisms.
Yeah.
Now, what we want to do, we're not going to get through this in this episode. We're just going to start it to start going on it. But there are some real problems historically with the Quran. The claims that Muslims make is that the Quran is perfect to begin with. It has no history. Therefore, we cannot really historically critique it. It is above historical criticism. They say only the Bible can be critiqued historically. Muslims have not dealt with their own Quran. They have no idea that there are some real historical anachronisms.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of them. And let's start with the Samaritan.
So there are lots of stories in the Quran. You can look at the people, you can look at the places are mentioned in the Quran. It's not that much, but there are still few stories. And then you can ask the basic questions. Those people lived in the time that Quran claims to live. For example, one of them is the story of the Samaritans.
In Surah 20, ayah 85 to 89, also 95 to 97, we have it on the screen there.
Yeah. Would you like to read the ayah for us, Jay?
Allah said, but indeed, we have tried your people after you, departed. And whenever just so that people know, whenever it's in parentheses, this is not in the Arabic, okay? This is what we would call commentary.
People are edited to make sense.
This has been added in by the commentators later on.
In the time of Moses, around 1400 BC, Allah is saying to Muhammad, in the time of Moses, Samaritans exist, and there is a communication between them, Moses and Samaritans. So, as they Christian, I would love to look at if that information is correct or not. I turn up the British Museum, room 10C. You see, actually no, Samaritans started to exist around 722 BC.
By whom? Sargon II. Sargon II is a Syrian king who comes down and attacks the 10 northern tribes of Israel, takes them up to Nimrud in his place, and also Khorsabad, where he lived, and then takes some of his people to repopulate the tribes of Israel in the north. They then marry with the Israelites that were left behind, and from their progeny come the Samaritans. So you can't have Samaritans before 722 BC. Let's do one more before we end this episode. Let's take a look at the mosque is too early. Now here in Surah 17, Ayah 1, you have Muhammad going from the Great Mosque, which would be down in Mecca, up to the farthest mosque, which would be in Jerusalem. And that's what all the commentaries say. The Great Mosque to the farthest mosque.
And that takes place around 621.
621 is the Miraj. This is the story about, this is the only reference in the Quran, Muslims tell us, about that great event where he goes up to the 7 heavens that we talked about earlier. So this is the Miraj. He goes on the back of the winged horse called the Burak in the middle of the night, flies up on that horse's back to Jerusalem, and that's what 17 Ayah 1. They have to find that in the Quran, and they have found it. There's a problem with that, isn't there?
There is a problem. Was this place exist in 621?
Was there any mosque? Were there even any Muslims in Jerusalem in 621? No Muslims had made it to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not conquered till about 650. So you're talking about 30 years later. This is 30 years too early. There was no mosque. There was no Dome of the Rock. That wasn't built to 691. The Masjid al-Aqsa wasn't built to 710. That's almost 90 years later.
It is one of the, again, sadness things in Islam. We look at the events Quran mentions, and then we put them in the historical timeline, we see it does not match with one another.
No. We're going to end it there. This is the first episode looking at the historical critique of the Quran. Come back as we continue with these historical anachronisms, as we then look through the source criticism, as we look through the manuscriptic criticism. We're going to look through some of the changes that have come about in the Quran. We're going to look at some of the problems with modern day Qurans, and we're also going to look at the Birmingham Folios. This is Jay and Hatun here in London. Over and out.